The obsidian walls of the Grand Synod did not reflect the light of the nebula outside. Rather, they seemed to drink it, swallowing the violet and gold luminescence of the galactic core and returning only a suffocating, heavy darkness. Here, in the highest spire of the Ethelgard dominion, the air was kept frigid, a sensory reminder of the cold logic that was supposed to govern the galaxy. But today, the cold offered no comfort. Today, the air tasted of ozone and terrified pheromones. The Grand Synod, a conclave of the 7 oldest and most technologically transcendent species in the known universe, was silent. It was a silence not of contemplation, but of a predator's paralysis, the stillness of a creature that realizes, for the first time in millennia, that it is no longer the apex. High Counselor Vrail of the Ethelgard shifted his weight on his levitation dais, his translucent, bioluminescent skin pulsing with a rhythmic dimness that betrayed his anxiety. Before him, suspended in the center of the vast, circular chamber, was a holographic projection of the void sector, a region of space that had been empty since the dawn of recorded history. It was no longer empty. A shape dominated the projection, a jagged tear in the fabric of reality that moved with impossible propulsion. It was a ship, though to call it such felt like a reduction of its horror. It was a moon-sized construct of weeping metal and dark energy, a vessel that defied the sleek, elegant aesthetics of the Council's fleet. It churned through the vacuum, leaving a wake of gravitational distortion that shattered asteroids and destabilized local stars. The Ethelgard sensors, capable of reading the quantum spin of an electron across a sector, could not penetrate its hull. They only registered a chaotic, screaming static that sounded like the death throes of 1,000 civilizations. This was the harbinger. For cycles, the Council had dismissed the rumors from the outer rims, the panicked transmissions from primitive species that spoke of a great silencer. Now the silencer was here, burning a path toward the core worlds and the mighty fleets of the 7. The fleets that had kept the peace for 10,000 cycles lay in scattered ruin at the edge of the Perseus Arm, swathes of debris floating where proud dreadnoughts had once stood. "It does not communicate," whispered Counselor Xyloth, a chitinous representative of the hive minds of Kex. His voice was a dry, raspy chitter translated instantly into the melodious telepathy of the room. "We have sent the linguistic algorithms. We have broadcast the sequences of mathematical unity. It simply erases. It is not an invader. It is an exterminator." Vrail looked at the tactical overlay. The Harbinger was moving faster than sublight engines should allow, ignoring the mass shadows of planets. "The fleets," Vrail projected his thought, his mental voice heavy with the weight of failure. "The Golden Armada, the Kex Swarm, the Singularity ships of the Urim, they are gone." "Non-functional," Xyloth corrected, though the logic in his voice was fraying. "The Harbinger emits a field, a entropy wave. Our shields failed before kinetic impact, our energy cores dampened. It is as if the laws of physics around that vessel are rewritten to favor decay. We cannot fight what turns our own power generation into rust and silence." A heavy, suffocating dread settled over the chamber. The Urim representative, a being of pressurized gas contained within a crystalline suit, dimmed its internal lights in a gesture of mourning. They were the masters of matter, the architects of stars, yet they sat here, children watching a storm approach, helpless. The debate had raged for rotational cycles. Evacuation was impossible. There were trillions of souls in the core. Surrender was impossible. The enemy did not acknowledge their existence. There remained only one variable, one unsightly, jagged variable that the Council had kept in the periphery of their pristine politics. "The Deathworlders," Vrail said. The word tasted foul in his mind. The chamber rippled with telepathic distaste. The Deathworld Alliance. It was a derogatory term initially, coined by the High Council to describe the loose coalition of species that had evolved on high gravity, tectonically unstable, or biologically hyperaggressive planets. These were species that had not transcended their environments through grace and technology, but had survived them through stubbornness and violence. At the head of this alliance was a species the Council found particularly baffling: the humans. They were a young race, barely out of their atmospheric infancy, soft-skinned, short-lived, and prone to illogical bursts of emotion. They had been granted a seat at the periphery of the Council not out of respect, but out of pity and a desire to monitor their aggressive expansion. "They have petitioned for an audience," Vrail continued, looking around the circle of hovering daises. "They claim to have a solution, or at the very least a strategy." "A strategy?" scoffed the crystalline Urim. "They use combustion, they use kinetic slugs, they use fission. They are children playing with fire. If our antimatter lances and psionic projectors could not scratch the Harbinger, what will their primitive loud noises accomplish? It is a waste of time. We should be calculating the trajectory of the escape arcs. The escape arcs will not be fast enough, Xyloth interjected, the hive mind's calculation cold and absolute. The Harbinger accelerates. We have no other data points. We have no other assets. Logic dictates we examine every variable, no matter how statistically insignificant. Vrail signaled the guards at the massive iridium doors. Let them in. The doors groaned open, the sound echoing through the silence of the chamber. Vrail expected a platoon of soldiers, perhaps shouting or brandishing their crude kinetic weapons to mask their fear. He expected the smell of unwashed biology and the chaotic noise of their vocal cords. Instead, the entry was almost disappointing in its quietude. 3 figures walked into the center of the Grand Synod. They wore no power armor, no shimmering force fields, no robes of office. They wore simple, utilitarian uniforms of a dark, matte gray made of a fabric that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. On their chests sat a simple emblem, a stylized planet cracked down the middle, held together by iron staples, the symbol of the Deathworld Alliance. The central figure was a human female, aging by their standards, her hair the color of steel wool, her face lined with the roadmap of a life spent in harsh gravity. She walked with a cane, an archaic stick of polished wood, yet she did not lean on it. She carried it like a weapon. Flanking her were 2 other Deathworlders, a Vraxian, a towering reptilian creature covered in scars, and a Katinar, a dense, insectoid tunnel dweller whose carapace was pitted from acid rain. But it was the human who held the room's attention. She stopped in the center of the projection, the holographic Harbinger spinning silently above her head. She did not look up at the terrifying ship. She looked directly at Vrail. "High Counselor," she said. Her voice was unamplified, forcing the council members to strain their sensors to hear her. "I am Admiral Hideo Vance. You requested a status report." "We requested nothing," the Urim representative hissed from its containment suit. "You petitioned us. We are debating the end of civilization, human. Do not waste our remaining moments with the posturing of the fringe worlds." Vance did not flinch. She did not look at the Urim. She kept her eyes locked on Vrail, her gaze unsettlingly calm. It was a look Vrail had never seen in a council species. The council species knew serenity, they knew intellectual detachment. But this was not that. This was the calm of a creature that accepts the presence of a predator and decides to bite back. "The Harbinger," Vance said, gesturing with her cane toward the hologram. "We call it the World Breaker. Our deep-range scouts picked up its signature 3 cycles ago. We have been tracking it." "Tracking it?" Vrail asked, his curiosity piqued despite his prejudice. "Our sensors can barely maintain a lock. How can your primitive optical arrays track a vessel that distorts reality?" "We didn't track the ship," Vance said. "We tracked the fear, we tracked the silence it leaves behind. And when we realized it was coming here, we mobilized." "Mobilized?" Xyloth chittered. "Your fleet consists of retrofitted haulers and kinetic destroyers. You possess no energy shielding of note. You have no psionic countermeasures. If you engage that vessel, you will be vaporized before you enter weapons range." "Likely," Vance agreed, and the admission hung in the air, shocking the council. A council commander would never admit defeat before a battle. "But we aren't planning to win a duel, Counselor. You fight wars like equations. You balance energy output against shield density. You look for the solution that yields 0 casualties. That is why you are losing. That ship up there, it doesn't care about your math, it breaks the equation." "And you have a solution that defies mathematics," the Urim mocked. "We have a different kind of math," Vance said softly. "The math of attrition. The math of the broken bone that heals stronger. You call us Deathworlders like it's a slur. You look at our worlds, high gravity, radiation storms, apex predators, and you wonder how we survived. You think we survived by avoiding danger. We didn't. We survived by walking into it. We survived by being more dangerous than the storm." She tapped a command into her wrist gauntlet. The holographic display shifted. The view zoomed out from the Harbinger to reveal a cloud of debris that the Council had assumed was space dust or sensor artifacts. "This is the Terran First Fleet," Vance said. "The Co." Until members leaned forward. The image resolved. It was not a fleet in the traditional sense. There were no formations, no elegant lines of battle. It was a chaotic swarm of thousands of ships. They were ugly, blocky things, scarred and welded together, covered in ablative armor plates so thick they looked like flying mountains. There were no graceful energy curves. These were bricks of titanium and tungsten, bristling with kinetic railguns, nuclear torpedo tubes, and grappling hooks. "We do not have your energy shields," Vance explained, her voice taking on a steely edge. "So we built ships that can take a hit. We do not have your antimatter lances, so we packed our holds with fusion charges and mass drivers. We are not here to out-tech the Harbinger. We are here to choke it." "Choke it?" Vrail asked, horror dawning on him. "We are going to ram it," Vance said simply. "We are going to board it. We are going to flood its corridors with bodies and lead and fire until it stops functioning. We are the Deathworld Alliance, Counselor. We don't fight clean. We fight to survive." The silence that followed was absolute. The council members stared at the human, appalled by the barbarism of the suggestion. Suicide tactics? Mass sacrifice? It went against every tenet of the high civilization. "This is madness," the Urim whispered. "It is biological waste. It is inefficient." "Efficiency is a luxury of the safe," Vance replied, turning to leave. "We didn't come here to ask for your permission, counselors. We came to tell you to clear the firing line. The Deathworlders are taking the vanguard. If we fail, then you can die with your dignity intact. But if we succeed, remember who stood between you and the dark." She turned and walked out, the click-clack of her cane echoing like a countdown. Vrail watched her go, a strange sensation rising in his chest. It was not hope, not yet. It was something more primal, a resonance with the ancient history of his own people before they had become beings of light and logic. It was the memory of fear and the memory of courage. The tactical view of the Void Sector shifted as the battle began. The Council watched from the safety of the Grand Synod, though safety felt like a fragile illusion now. The Harbinger had entered the gravity well of the Perseus Gate, the primary hyperlane to the core worlds. It hung in space like a wound, bleeding darkness. Then the Deathworld fleet arrived. They did not warp in with a flash of graceful light. They tore out of subspace with a violence that shook the sensors. Thousands of ships, vomiting exhaust and radiation, emerged in a sphere around the massive enemy vessel. There was no hesitation, no hailing frequencies, no posturing. "They are ignoring the entropy field," Xyloth observed, his telepathic voice trembling. "How?" "They aren't ignoring it," Vrail said, watching the readouts. "They are absorbing it." The lead ships of the human fleet, massive, tombstone-shaped dreadnoughts, were taking the brunt of the Harbinger's passive defenses. Vrail watched as the hull of the lead ship, the UNS Indomitable, began to rust and buckle under the entropy wave. But it didn't slow down. Thrusters flared white-hot, fighting against the decay, pushing the crumbling ship forward. "Impact in 10 seconds, the tactical AI announced. The Council flinched. The Indomitable, now a burning wreck of slag, slammed into the side of the Harbinger. It didn't penetrate the shields with energy, it smashed through them with sheer mass and kinetic velocity. The silence of the void was broken by the sensor ghosts of tearing metal. And then another ship impacted, and another. "They are using their own ships as kinetic missiles," the Urim gasped. "Barbaric." "Look," Vrail commanded, zooming in on the impact sites. "They aren't just crashing, they are docking." From the wreckage of the human ships, breaching pods were firing like spores into the hull of the Harbinger. The Deathworlders weren't just destroying the enemy, they were invading it. The perspective shifted to the helmet cam feeds that the humans had graciously, or perhaps arrogantly, patched into the Council's network. The view was shaking, grainy, and illuminated only by the muzzle flashes of kinetic rifles. Inside the Harbinger, the architecture was non-Euclidean, shifting and turning in ways that hurt the eyes. Shadows moved with intent. But the humans, along with the lizard-like Vraxians and the insectoid Katinar, pushed forward. The audio feed was a cacophony of shouting, the roar of shotguns, and the wet thud of alien biology meeting resistance. "Move, move, clear the breach," a voice screamed. A human sergeant, armor scarred, visor cracked. They were fighting nightmare constructs, automata made of liquid shadow and blades. The Council's soldiers would have panicked. The Council's soldiers would have tried to analyze the enemy's weakness. The humans did not analyze. They applied overwhelming. Violence. A shadow construct lunged at the sergeant. A Vraxian warrior intercepted it, grappling the creature with bare claws, roaring a challenge that vibrated through the audio feed, while the human pumped a shotgun shell into its core. Vrail watched, mesmerized. It was horrifying, it was messy. It was entirely devoid of elegance, and it was working. The Harbinger's forward batteries, which had been charging to fire on the core worlds, suddenly flickered and died. "They have severed the primary power coupling," Xyloth reported, disbelief coloring his tone. A suicide squad detonated a fusion warhead inside the conduit. Did they survive? The Urim asked. No, Vrail said softly. They did not expect to. The battle raged for hours. The Deathworld Alliance was dying. The space around the Harbinger was a graveyard of broken gray hulls. The human fleet was being whittled down ship by ship. The entropy field was taking its toll. Even the stubborn human technology was failing. The indomitable was gone. The breach points were being overrun. In the Grand Synod, the mood shifted from disdain to a terrifying realization. The humans were losing, yes, but they were losing slowly. They were buying time. Every minute they held the Harbinger was a minute the Council had to. To do what? Vrail looked at his hands. He looked at the faces of his peers. They were terrified. They were waiting for the inevitable. They were waiting for the humans to die so that they could begin their own deaths. This is shameful, Vrail said. The thought started as a whisper in his mind, but projected outward with the force of a psionic shout. The Council turned to him. We sit here, Vrail stood up, his bioluminescence flaring to a blinding white. We sit here and watch them bleed. We called them savages. We called them primitives. Look at them. They are facing the end of the universe with a piece of sharpened metal and a refusal to kneel. And we, the elder races, the masters of the stars, we hide behind our shields and critique their efficiency. Vrail, Xyloth warned, intervention is illogical. Our fleets are damaged. If we engage, we will be destroyed alongside them. Logic dictates. Logic dictates that if they fall, we die anyway, Vrail roared, his voice cracking the telepathic calm. There is no logic in cowardice, Xyloth. There is only fear. The humans are not fighting because they calculate a probability of victory. They are fighting because it is the right thing to do. They possess something we have lost. They possess the will to endure. Vrail tapped his command console. This is High Counselor Vrail to the Ethelgard Remnant Fleet. All vessels decloak. All vessels lock trajectories on the Harbinger. Vrail, you cannot, the Urim shrieked. This is a violation of the consensus. The consensus is dead, Vrail declared. I am dissolving the isolation protocols. I am joining the fight. He looked at Xyloth. The insectoid stared back, its compound eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, the hive mind nodded. The probability of survival increases from 0% to 12% if we combine forces. Logic dictates aggression. Keck swarm engaging, Xyloth announced. Urim singularity ships, coming online, the crystalline voice wavered, then firmed. We will not be outdone by water bags. The Grand Synod transformed. The atmosphere of funeral silence shattered into a frenzy of tactical commands. The remaining fleets of the Seven, damaged but technologically superior, warped into the void sector. On the tactical display, the scene changed. The gray, broken swarm of the human fleet was suddenly illuminated by the brilliant, golden lances of Ethelgard cruisers. The Xylar swarm ships, agile and geometric, wove through the heavy human dreadnoughts, providing point defense against the shadow fighters. The Urim singularity projectors fired, not at the Harbinger, but at the space around it, warping gravity to counteract the entropy field. Admiral Vance, Vrail's voice boomed over the open channel, reaching the bridge of the human flagship. This is High Counselor Vrail. We are marking targets for your kinetic drivers. Our shields will cover your advance. Do not let up. There was a pause on the line. Then Vance's voice came through, strained, exhausted, but alive. About damn time, Counselor. We were starting to think you were shy. Left flank is buckling. We need psionic suppression on their aft quadrant. Consider it done, Vrail said, closing his eyes and linking his mind with the Ethelgard battle scions. The synergy was chaotic, ugly, and magnificent. The humans provided the anvil, the immovable physical mass that absorbed the blows and held the line. The Council provided the hammer, the precise, high-energy strikes that exploited the openings the humans created. When a human ship lost engines, an Urim tractor beam caught it. When an Ethelgard cruiser's shields faltered, a Vraxian frigate slammed into the path of the incoming. Fire taking the hit with its armor. It was the first time in galactic history that the civilized and the Deathworlders fought as one. And in that chaos, the Harbinger faltered. The massive ship, besieged from without and within, began to shudder. The entropy field collapsed under the combined weight of psionic will and nuclear fire. The human boarding parties, now reinforced by Ethelgard Templars and Keck's drones, pushed to the core of the vessel. We have reached the central chamber, Vance reported. Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The feed cut to the interior. The central chamber of the Harbinger was not a bridge. It was a mausoleum. In the center, suspended in a column of amber light, was not a pilot, but a crystal. A massive, pulsing data storage crystal, humming with a frequency that made Vrail's teeth ache even through the transmission. It's not a weapon, Vance whispered. Her voice was trembling. Admiral, scan the data stream. Vrail watched the data scroll across the screen. The translation algorithms worked furiously. The text began to resolve. It is a warning, Xyloth said, the hive mind falling silent in awe. The Harbinger wasn't a destroyer. It was an Arca lifeboat from a previous universe. The destruction it caused, the entropy field, the shadow constructs, they were automated defense systems gone senile with age, programmed to protect the message at all costs, unable to distinguish between friend and foe. What does it say? Vrail asked. Vance stepped forward in the chamber, her hand resting on the humming crystal. The shooting had stopped. The shadow constructs had deactivated the moment the core was breached. It says, Vance read, her voice echoing in the Grand Synod. It says, we are the last of the first cycle. We failed to stop the silence. It is coming for you. We built this ship to carry the seeds of resistance. If you are reading this, you are the inheritors. You must be stronger than we were. You must be unified. The message repeated, looping in a billion dead languages. Vrail slumped back on his dais. The silence in the Grand Synod was different now. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a burden being placed upon shoulders that had just proven they were strong enough to bear it. The silence the message spoke of, the true enemy was out there. The Harbinger had been a test, a gauntlet thrown down by the ghosts of the past to see if the current galaxy was worthy of the warning. If the humans had not attacked, if the Council had not joined, the Harbinger would have simply plowed through them, deeming them too weak to inherit the war. The battle ended. The fleets drifted together in the void, a mix of golden spires and gray bricks, united by debris and victory. Days later, the diplomatic landscape of the galaxy had been rewritten. There was no longer a High Council and a Deathworld Alliance. The distinctions had burned away in the fire of the Perseus Gate. Vrail stood on the observation deck of the repaired Grand Synod, looking out at the stars. Admiral Vance stood beside him. She looked smaller without the backdrop of war, her uniform pressed, her cane tapping a slow rhythm on the floor. But Vrail knew better now. He knew the density of the spirit contained within that fragile biological frame. They are calling it the Alliance of the Void now, Vrail said, gesturing to the news feeds scrolling on the walls. A unified command structure. We are integrating your kinetic technology with our energy matrices, and we are training our youth in your philosophy. Our philosophy? Vance raised an eyebrow, a hint of a smile touching her lips. You mean stubbornness. I mean resilience, Vrail corrected. We spent thousands of cycles trying to perfect the universe, to smooth out the rough edges. We forgot that life thrives on the edges. We forgot that sometimes, to survive, you must be willing to bleed. He looked at the human. The message from the Harbinger, the silence. It is a threat from beyond the galactic rim, a consumer of universes. We have time to prepare, but not much. We'll be ready, Vance said. She looked out at the stars, not with the wonder of an explorer, but with the tactical assessment of a soldier. You have the tech, Vrail. You have the science and the psionics. And what do you have, Admiral? Vrail asked, though he already knew the answer. Vance turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw the reflection of 1,000 storms, the genetic memory of ice ages and volcanic eruptions, the indomitable will of a species that had crawled out of the mud and dared to punch God in the face. We have the grit, she said, and when the silence comes, we'll be the ones screaming back. Vrail nodded. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, pale, luminous, ethereal. Then he looked at Vance, scarred, solid, real. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Then let them come, Vrail said high, his voice echoing the newfound steel in his soul. For we are the Deathworlders now. The galaxy spun on, no longer a place of silent, separated empires, but a fortress being built against the dark. The most dangerous ship had been defeated, but it had left behind something far more dangerous to the enemies of life, a galaxy that knew how to fight together. And at the prow of that great galactic vessel stood the humans, smiling their terrifying, baring-teeth smiles, teaching the gods how to hold the line. The archives of the Ethelgard now contain a new entry, mandatory reading for all fledglings of the high castes. It is not a mathematical theorem or a philosophical treatise. It is a simple observation, recorded by High Counselor Vrail in the aftermath of the Harbinger event. Civilization is not measured by the height of your spires or the efficiency of your engines. Civilization is measured by what you are willing to sacrifice to keep the lights on. The universe is a dark forest filled with predators, but we are no longer afraid, for we have found the wolves that fight for the light, and we run with them. The narrative of the galaxy had shifted from a story of preservation to a story of defiance. The great armadas of the Ethelgard, once pristine and unblemished, now bore the painted symbols of the Deathworlders on their hulls, crude, jagged marks of honor. The Urim had begun to experiment with solid matter projectiles, finding a strange satisfaction in the tangible impact of mass. The Xylar hive mind had integrated human strategic unpredictability into its algorithms, creating a logic strain that was terrifyingly creative. Deep in the void, the Harbinger sat, now a silent monument, a forward operating base for the new alliance. Human engineers crawled over its hull like ants, welding, bypassing, and hot-wiring the ancient technology with a reckless ingenuity that horrified and impressed the Ethelgard scientists assisting them. They were waking the dormant systems, turning the world breaker into the world shield. The twist of the Harbinger, that it was a messenger, not a murderer, had shaken the council to its core. It implied that there were things in the dark that even the ancient builders of the Harbinger feared. It implied a scale of conflict that made their previous wars look like playground squabbles. But the fear that had once paralyzed the council was gone. It had been replaced by purpose. Admiral Vance stood on the bridge of the repurposed Harbinger, watching the combined fleets run drills. A squadron of Ethelgard interceptors wove through a debris field, followed closely by heavy human corvettes. They moved in sync, a dance of light and iron. "Admiral," a communications officer called out, a young Ethelgard wearing a modified uniform that accommodated his biology. "Long-range sensors are picking up a signal from the outer dark. It matches the frequency warning in the Harbinger's database." The bridge went silent. The silence was pinging them. It was a scout signal, a query from the dark to see if the prey was still there. Vance looked at the tactical map. She looked at the icons of 100 different species moving as one. She didn't feel the dread she expected. She felt a cold, hard anticipation. "Let them ping," Vance said. "Let them see us, open a channel on all frequencies, broad-spectrum transmission." "What message shall we send, Admiral?" the officer asked. Vance smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who has found her pack. "Send them the roster," she said. "Send them the coordinates, and tell them the Deathworld Alliance sends its regards." The signal blasted out into the dark, a challenge screaming across the light years. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a declaration of war, and somewhere in the deep, cold infinite, something heard it. And for the first time in eons, it hesitated. The story of the galaxy was just beginning. The weeks following the unification were a blur of frenetic activity, a chaotic blending of cultures that had spent millennia avoiding one another. On the orbital shipyards of Mars, Ethelgard psionic architects worked alongside human welders, using telekinesis to hold massive bulkheads in place while the humans sealed them with plasma torches. The air was filled with the smell of ozone and sweating bodies, a stark contrast to the sterile manufacturing plants of the core worlds. There was friction, of course. The Xylar found human music to be a chaotic disruption of their neural links. The Urim found the human tendency to pack food into portable rations disgusting. But the friction was the friction of gears meshing, not grinding. High Counselor Vrail found himself spending more time in the Sol system than on his homeworld. He was fascinated by the humans' history, their archives of wars fought over ideology, resources, and land. It seemed insane to him that a species could be so self-destructive and yet so resilient. He sat in a library in Geneva reading a physical book, a novelty he cherished, when Admiral Vance found him. "Studying the enemy," she teased, her voice raspy from days of shouting orders. "Studying the anomaly," Vrail corrected, closing the book. It was a history of the 20th century. "You nuked your own planet twice, and then you rebuilt it, and then you built a fleet to protect it." "We're slow learners," Vance admitted, sitting opposite him. She looked tired. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, leaving the reality of the coming war to settle in. "But we learn." "The signal we received," Vrail said, his tone turning serious. "The silence. The Ethelgard deep-mind seers have been analyzing it. It is, Hungry, it is not a biological hunger. It is an ontological hunger. It seeks to consume the concept of existence itself. Sounds cheerful, Vance muttered. We cannot defeat it with firepower alone, Vrail said. The Harbinger's records suggest the first cycle civilizations had weapons that could supernova stars, and they still fell. They fell because they fought as individuals. They fought for their own survival, not for the survival of the whole. We've covered that, Vance said. We're an alliance now. An alliance is a political term, Vrail said, leaning forward. We need something more. We need a cultural synthesis. The Ethelgard have always suppressed emotion to heighten logic. The humans suppress logic to heighten emotion. We need to bleed into each other. Vance looked at him, understanding the gravity of his suggestion. He wasn't talking about biology. He was talking about the soul of their civilizations. You want to teach your people to get angry? Vance asked. I want to teach them to care, Vrail said. And I want you to teach your people to see beyond the immediate threat, to see the tapestry. It was a radical proposal. It meant the end of the Ethelgard as they had existed for 10,000 years. It meant the end of humanity as a scrappy underdog faction. It meant becoming something new, a hybrid civilization. The Council won't like it, Vance warned. The Council is irrelevant, Vrail said, a trace of human stubbornness coloring his voice. The Council is a relic. We are building the future. The integration began in the fleets. Mixed crews became the standard. On the bridge of the UNS Indomitable II, a Vraxian tactical officer coordinated fire solutions with an Urim navigator. In the mess halls, Ethelgard scholars debated philosophy with human marines. They shared stories. They shared fears. The Ethelgard learned the concept of spite, the refusal to die just to annoy the enemy. The humans learned the concept of Kala, the interconnectedness of all living things. And as they trained, the universe watched. The signal from the dark grew stronger. The silence was approaching. It arrived 6 months later. It did not come as a ship. It came as a darkening of the stars. A sector of the sky simply went black, as if a curtain had been drawn across the cosmos. The stars didn't die. Their light was simply eaten. The Alliance fleet, now a massive, sprawling armada of hybrid technology, gathered at the edge of the darkness. This time there was no debate. There was no fear. There was only the quiet hum of weapons charging and the psychic resonance of 1 trillion minds focused on a single purpose. Vrail stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive vessel built from the hull of the Harbinger and expanded with Ethelgard crystal tech. Beside him stood Vance. They looked at the encroaching dark. Sensors are reading. Nothing, the tactical officer reported. No mass, no energy, just absence. It's here, Vrail whispered. He could feel it in his mind. A cold, oily pressure trying to snuff out his consciousness. Fleet, Vance's voice rang out, amplified across the entire system. This is it. The lights are going out. The universe is trying to close its eyes. We are here to prop them open. She looked at Vrail, ready. Always, Vrail said. All ships, Vance commanded, ignite. At her command, the fleet didn't just fire weapons. They ignited their engines, their shields, their active sensors, and their psionic amplifiers. They became a supernova of defiance. The darkness recoiled. For a moment, the wall of nothingness wavered, burned back by the sheer intensity of the light, both physical and spiritual, that the Alliance projected. And then from the darkness, shapes began to emerge. Not ships, not creatures, but nightmares made manifest. The silence used the fears of its prey against them. For the humans, it looked like demons of fire and ash. For the Ethelgard, it looked like broken logic and fractured crystals. But the Alliance held. They're trying to separate us, Vrail shouted, his mind straining against the psychic assault. They're trying to make us see individual fears. Then don't look with your eyes, Vance yelled back. Look with the fleet. The order was understood. The ships linked their targeting computers. A human gunner fired at a target only the Ethelgard could perceive. An Urim shield operator blocked an attack that only a Vraxian could sense. They became a single organism, a creature of 1,000 species and one will. The battle was not fought in minutes or hours. It was fought in days. It was a grinder. Ships exploded, their crews screaming defiance into the void. But for every ship that fell, the darkness was pushed back a micrometer. The turning point came when the Harbinger-class flagship, the Alliance one, drove straight into the heart of the darkness. It carried a payload developed by the combined genius of the 7 races. A reality anchor, a device designed to assert the laws of physics in a localized area, effectively poisoning the silence with existence. "Delivery in T-minus 10 seconds, Vance shouted. The bridge was shaking violently. Sparks showered from the ceiling. "Shields are gone," Vrail reported, his hands flying over the console. "Hull integrity at 20%. "Hold it together, Vrail." "I am holding." The ship plunged into the black. The sensation was like drowning in ice water. The crew screamed as the darkness tried to unmake them. But they held. They held on to each other. They held on to the memory of green hills, of golden spires, of the taste of water, of the sound of laughter. They held on to life. Deploying anchor. The device detonated. It was not an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of truth. The reality of the universe, gravity, light, time, matter, slammed back into place with the force of a thunderclap. The darkness shattered. The nightmares dissolved, unable to exist in a universe that refused to yield its rules. The shockwave threw the Alliance one back into real space. The crew lay on the deck, gasping, bleeding, alive. Vrail pulled himself up to the console. The sensors were rebooting. The darkness was gone. In its place was a scarred, nebular region, but the stars were shining again. Did we win?" a young officer asked, his voice trembling. Vance limped to the viewport. She looked out at the stars. They looked brighter than she remembered. "We didn't win," Vance said softly. "You don't win against the dark. You just survive it until the dawn." She turned to Vrail. He was glowing dimly, exhausted, but his eyes were bright. "But we made it to morning," she added. Vrail nodded. "Yes, we made it to morning." The aftermath of the War of the Silence changed the galaxy forever. The Deathworld Alliance was no longer a fringe faction. It was the heart of the new Galactic Federation. The distinction between Deathworlder and civilized had vanished completely. Now there were only the wakeful, those who kept watch. The council chamber, once a place of fear and segregation, was rebuilt. It was now an open forum, a circular hall with no high seats, no shadows. In the center stood a statue. It was not of a human or an Ethelgard or a Vraxian. It was a statue of two hands, one scaled and clawed, one smooth and luminous, clasping a jagged piece of metal. Underneath, the inscription read, "In the darkness we found our hands. In the silence we found our voice." Vrail retired from the High Council. He spent his remaining cycles teaching at the Academy on Earth. He taught a course called The Logic of the Illogical. His favorite lesson was to take his students, highly advanced Ethelgard telepaths and stoic Urim engineers, to a simple, ancient human structure, a lighthouse. "Look at it," he would say, the wind whipping his robes. "It serves no strategic purpose in war. It generates no resources. It is a simple light, kept burning by a keeper who might never see the ships he saves." "Why is it important, Professor?" a student would ask. "Because," Vrail would answer, his mind drifting back to a cold chamber and a human woman with a cane, "it is the ultimate defiance. The universe says, 'Here is the dark, here are the rocks, here is the danger.' And the lighthouse says, 'No, here I am, and you will not crash today.'" He would look out at the ocean, and then up at the sky, where the great ships of the Alliance patrolled, silent guardians of the flame. "That is what we became," Vrail would whisper. "We became the lighthouse." And far above, in the cold vacuum, the UNS Indomitable III drifted past the moon, its hull gray and blocky, its engines humming a low, defiant song, ready to burn against the night forever. The galaxy was safe, not because there were no monsters left, but because the monsters had learned to be afraid of the light.